When I was in college, my friend Nick had a secret. He had discovered something in the woods. In the middle of the night, he took a car full of us to show us what he had found. And we drove across the state line to I'm not sure where. There weren't enough flashlights between all of us, but somehow we stumbled through these woods and we came to an opening in the hillside near the ground. And there wasn't much there other than a few rocks and the frayed end of a red rope hanging outside. You see, Nick had discovered an entire system of underground tunnels and caves in the middle of nowhere. And he took us to go exploring through those caves, and most of it was so small that you had to snake crawl through, or there were certain points where you had to actually exhale all of the air out of your lungs and go through one arm at a time. There were a few spots that were big enough to sit up in, but for the most part, you would come to a section and it looked like it might be humanly impossible to fit through, except that there was the red rope. The one from the very beginning of the cave ran all the way through it because Nick just kept tying on to the rope as he explored. And so if he ever went to a part through a tunnel that was a dead end, he just backed out and brought the rope with him and went a different way. So as we were crawling through behind him, we knew that anywhere the red rope went, someone had been there before. And at any point, we could always turn around and follow it back out. Someone had been there before, and there was a way out. It's good to be with you guys here this morning and all of our friends in the theater and joining us online. You know, it's amazing to me every time I tell Nick's story about this adventure that we had in college, how many people think I am beginning to tell the story of my own murder. Because whether or not you like caves or think of them as an adventure or not, there's something about night and dark and caves and small spaces that make us feel constrained, that make us sense the darkness and the foreboding and the danger about them. And this week, as we are chasing David, we are going to chase him right into the caves. 1 Samuel 22:1 says, David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. David spends a long season of his life running for his life in caves. It is a time where his life takes a turn and the circumstances are completely unfair, unwanted, and leaves his future incredibly uncertain. And some of us know what it's like to feel like we are in a place that feels too tight for us to fit through, that feels dark, that feels unfair and unwanted, and leaves us really uncertain about what's next ahead. But here's the good news for us. David didn't just make it through the caves. He left us a red rope to let us know that someone had been there before and that there is a way out. And he tells us through his hard-earned cave wisdom 4 ways that God surprises us in the dark. The first thing is that God's plan is going to surprise us. See, if you've been following us with David, we started with him being the youngest son of Jesse and the very unlikely choice of God to be anointed as the future king of Israel. Then we go through this long season of waiting where he's just sort of hanging out with sheep. And then last week we saw David kill Goliath. This is super exciting, as you would imagine, things really take off from there. David becomes one of the most celebrated military heroes in Israel. He moves into the king's court. He becomes best friends with the king's son. He marries the king's daughter. He is not only insanely popular with all of the people of Israel, he is deeply loved by his own people, and he is perfectly poised to take the crown to be king of Israel until everything changes. Because Saul is not perfectly poised to give up the crown of king of Israel. And so he decides to kill David. He throws a spear at him and tries to pin him against the wall. He attempts to kill him in his bed while he's supposedly asleep. He sends waves of soldiers after him. And David is in turn rescued by Jonathan, rescued by his wife Michal, and rescued by the Spirit of God himself. But all of that dramatic rescue meant that David was fleeing for his life and running into these caves. He lost everything when he went on the run. He was no longer the mighty warrior of Israel. He was no longer the beloved friend, the beloved husband. He was no longer in the court of the king with the best and the brightest people around. He was this close to finally getting the promise that God had made him. And then everything changed. And some of us know what it's like to be on a certain trajectory in our life and then to feel like a sharp left turn comes out of nowhere, or like the rug has just been pulled out from underneath us. But here's the thing. David is still a man after God's own heart. David is still one of God's favorites. God still has a plan for David's life. And the nutty thing is that this same thing happens to so many of God's favorite people. Joseph, youngest brother, destined to be a great leader, goes through a long season of waiting, actually in slavery. And then finally, it seems like everything has changed. He has a meteoric rise in the house of Potiphar, a major leader. And he gets to the very top, and it looks like he's finally going to become the leader that God has imagined him to be, when something completely unfair, completely untrue, completely unjust sends him to jail, and he loses everything. Jesus, God's own son, was born as the promised Messiah, goes through a long period of waiting, has this meteoric rise to where it looks like the people have finally understood that this could be the Messiah, perfectly poised to take the crown from Rome. And then it looks like he loses everything. The crazy thing is that most of the New Testament is actually written to help us to suffer well. It's not unnormal to be following God, to be in the center of his plan, and to have things come into our lives, not sent by God, but that are completely unfair, completely unwanted, and leave us very uncertain. And even if God doesn't do those things to us, that pain is not something that will go without a purpose. Because that part of our story is not the whole story. God has a bigger story and a bigger plan. Because David would go on to become the king of Israel. But he wasn't going to do it because he was Saul's son-in-law. He was going to do it in a way that only God could make possible. Joseph would go on to become one of the great leaders of Egypt, but he wasn't going to do it because of Potiphar's connections. He was going to do it in a way that only God could make possible. Jesus is the Messiah and the Savior of our world, but he isn't that because he was elected by the people of Israel. He came and became the Savior and the Messiah right now and in our future in a way that only God could make possible. You see, where we think that we are at the end of ourselves and the story cannot possibly have another chapter, that is where God starts. That is where what only God can make possible begins. Don't give up. Don't give up. It is only just getting started. 1 Peter 4 says, "Dear friends, do not be surprised when the fiery ordeal that has come on to test you, as though something strange were happening to you." It's not strange. It feels strange. It feels like the definition of strange, because it feels like we were heading a totally logical, natural direction, and then it feels completely strange that suddenly we've gone a different way. And some of us know these kinds of minor disappointments that still feel really big to us, where we thought for sure that school was where we were going to go until we didn't. We thought for sure that person was going to be our person until they weren't. We thought for sure that that house was going to be our home, and then it wasn't. And it looked, we were trying to pray, we were trying to seek God's wisdom, we were trying to seek his direction in our lives, and we think, did we hear him wrong? Was he ever talking to us? Does he even have a plan for this? He does. And you are just at the beginning of it. Don't give up now. God's plan is going to surprise you. And even if you are in the deepest and darkest of disappointments, even if you have come from the highest high to the lowest low, God's plan is going to surprise you. And this is where what only he can do begins. This is not the end. Don't give up. God's provision for us in the caves is going to surprise us. See, when we're in the dark, we feel alone and we feel like we don't even have the oxygen that we need to breathe. But God has given us and made available to us more than we realize. God gave David a very unexpected gift. We see in 1 Samuel 22:2, picking up from that verse that we read earlier in the introduction, all those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with him. So David came from being the best military leader in Israel with the top soldiers under his command. And now he has lost everything and he's alone in the cave. But if that weren't bad enough, he doesn't get to stay alone in the cave. The people who are in debt, the people who are in distress, the people, one translation says bitter of soul, all of the people who society has eaten up and spit out are now gathering to him in the caves. All of the angry, bitter, wanted men of Israel are coming to keep David company. Someone once asked the comedian Jim Gaffigan, what's it like to have a fourth kid? And he said, well, it's kind of like you're drowning, and then someone hands you a baby. David is drowning in the caves, and God hands him 400 worse than babies, like giant babies who are angry and big. And here's the thing, he becomes their commander. Now, the Bible doesn't say this next part, but I just want you to use your imagination with me. We've got all of these men who are wanted for one reason or another and incredibly unwanted for one reason or another. And they're coming in these caves with David. You know that they had to have fire in there, right? Like there had to be some sort of campfire or something. And David wrote a bunch of his songs while he was in the cave. And David loves to dance, and David loves to sing, and David loves to write. And you know that these guys had some stories. Like they had some stories. And I can just imagine that these nights in the caves, that these guys are coming around and they are just bringing what they have, even though it's not good enough for anyone else. They're bringing it to the campfire, and they're telling stories, and they're singing songs, and something really magical happens. Because these 400 rejected men soon become David's 400 mighty men. In these caves, these men make the transformation from being the worst that society had to offer to being the most elite military task force that Israel had seen. Like think Sparta's 300, this is David's 400. And more than that, they are fiercely loyal to David. There comes a point where they risk their lives to bring him a cup of water. These men who looked like a deficit for David end up becoming his best friends and his best allies and his best resource. And here's the thing. God has given us people in our lives who don't look like they can offer us much. You might be surprised the people and the things that God has provided for you right now in the dark that feel like they are taking from you and not giving to you. But God has given you something that you might not recognize as an incredible asset. Here's the other thing. When I feel overwhelmed, when I am on the run, I personally shut down. Anyone else? Like this is when I hide. This is when I withdraw. This is when I get alone. Because I am so overwhelmed, I really can't deal with you. And I really can't deal with you dealing with me. And I call it going turtle. I just kind of go into my little shell where it feels safe and I hide there. But when we're in the caves, we can't get alone. We have to get together. Because that is one of the ways that God is going to provide for us, is through one another. And we so easily discount each other because of the way we look, or because of the interests we have, or because of where we came from. But here's the thing about the campfire that God's building. We are all welcome around it. We can all come exactly as we are, even if what we are isn't good enough for anyone else. And that's the kind of campfire that we want to build here at Westgate. And we've got lots of different campfires going through the week. We've got life group campfires where people are gathering around together, and I know that there are still many that have space for more to join. We have these emotional health cohorts that are coming together, and there's still space in some of those to join. If you're at San Jose State, Campus Crusade has lit an amazing campfire. At a lot of our high schools and junior highs, Young Life and other Christian clubs are keeping those campfires burning. And when you are in the darkness, it is probably your intuition to get alone. But now is the time to come together, because God is going to provide for you through people who you don't expect, in ways that you don't expect here in the dark. And it's going to be hard. but you just need to ask for help. It's really hard to ask for help, especially when it's something that we feel like we should be okay with, we should have under control, we should be able to do ourselves. But we are all around the same campfire, and we all need help at different times. And asking for help doesn't mean that you're not as competent as the other people around the campfire. It just means that it's your turn to ask for help. And if it's your turn to ask for help, and you've been holding on to it because you've been trying to wrestle and muscle through it, now's your time. Come out of the corner. It's not time to be alone. It's time to come together and ask for help. Ask your people for help, and ask God to give you what you need. Whether that's the people that you need or the things that you need, ask God to give you what you need and to open your eyes to what he's already given you. It might really surprise you. Other people are not the only ones in the cave with us. Believe it or not, God is with us in the cave too. But God's presence is going to surprise us because it is going to feel and look different than we have experienced it before. It's going to feel and look different than what we experienced it as before. But you know, when people lose their sight, a lot of times they end up having their other senses enhanced, like their hearing might get really, really good. And there are things in the cave where when we lose some of those ways that we have seen and experienced God before, our other senses of him, our faith in him is grown in a way that can only happen in the dark. God's presence is with us. In the Bible, we see caves show up in a lot of different stories. And the motif of cave sort of has this like flip side of a coin. In one side, when we see caves in the Bible, they oftentimes have to do with death and loss. And a lot of caves are used actually as tombs. But there's something else. There's something else that happens in caves in the Bible. Caves are where God meets with people. Moses goes up to Mount Sinai, and God holds him in a cave with his hand so that he can watch him walk by. Elijah meets with God in a cave, and God whispers something to him that we still don't even know. David met God in this cave. David was not abandoned by God in the cave. Listen to what he says. He writes in Psalm 139, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light will become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you." David didn't even know when he wrote this, the truth about light and darkness. He knew it without knowing that he knew it, that the night could be as day to God. Because did you know that the way that we experience light is a very limited part of the spectrum? Light exists on this entire electromagnetic spectrum, from short waves to long waves, and our human eyes only see a tiny slice of it. Some animals can see different parts of it that we can't. But photons, which are the raw material of light, they are everywhere. Light noise is everywhere. In fact, you could go to the deepest part of the earth, in the deepest, darkest cave that you could find, with miles of mountains on top of you, blocking the sun. And your eyes would not be able to see a speck of dark, or a speck of light. But there is light. In fact, scientists have tried, but they can't get rid of the light. There is no such thing as absolute darkness. No such thing. Spiritually speaking, scientifically speaking, there is no such thing as absolute darkness. It might feel pretty pitch dark right now, but there's no such thing as absolute darkness. And sometimes the victory of light over dark is not shining as bright as the day. It is just telling the dark that you can come this far, but you can go no further. God's presence is closer to you than you realize in the dark. There is no place where light is not with you. God's promises are going to surprise us in the dark. See, most of us don't have the same promise that David had to become king of Israel one day. But isn't it interesting that having that promise didn't actually make David's life any easier? There are actually many promises that God has given us. And when I'm in the dark, there are 3 that I hold on to. That is that he is with us, he is good, and he rescues us. These are just some of the promises that God makes us. You know, a couple months ago, Steve talked about the Bible Promises for You book. And it's just a book of scripture, just verses that declare God's promises over our lives. There's so many in here, but I just want to read a few over you because God is with us and he is good and he will rescue us. The Lord is near to all who call on him. To all who call on him in truth. Psalm 145:18. God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Hebrews 13:5. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The Lord is good, a refuge in times of trouble. He cares for those who trust in him. Nahum 1:7. Because he loves me, said the Lord, I will rescue him. I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. He will call upon me and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. If this is a time in your life that feels just a little dark and you need some promises to hang on to, come on up after the service and I would love to get one of these books to you. Because even when we're in the cave, God is with us and his promises are with us. And there, if we look in the muddy, dark corner, we will see a red rope. Because no matter where we are, someone has been there before us. We are not the first people to be in the dark. Someone has been there before us. Someone has seen the goodness of God there, and someone has found their way back out again. David left us a cord in Psalm 142, and we're going to pray through it together to let him lead us out of the cave. Jesus left us an incredible red cord. Because, you know, when it looked like Jesus was just about to become Messiah, if you want to talk about something that was completely unfair, completely unwanted, that left his disciples utterly uncertain, he was brutally killed on the cross, right when it seemed like God's promise was in reach. And the disciples took his body, his game over, end of the road, nowhere to go from here. We must have understood God wrong body. And they put it in a cave. They buried him in a cave and they rolled the stone back over it. Here's the thing. We don't just serve a God, a Jesus who has been in the cave. We serve a Jesus who has come out of the cave, who declares his victory over sin and death and everything that seems most final in our lives. And he declares his intention for resurrection and redemption over the darkest places that we look. And we are going to celebrate his death and his resurrection and the cord that he leaves us, the hope that he leaves us to hold on to today with communion. But there's a third kind of rope. A third kind of rope. Because I'm going to tell you, in a room this size, there are absolutely people who have been in a cave and found their way out. We all carry our own stories and our own witnesses. And I know that this is a little awkward, but here's the thing. For those of you who have been in a very dark place, and you want someone else in here who is in a dark place now to know that now is not the time to give up, would you please stand up? Would you please hold that hope and hold that cord for the rest of us? In the theater, if you have been in a dark place and you want to hold that hope for other people who can't hold it right now, would you please stand up? Thank you. There are so many witnesses to God's goodness in here. Would you guys, those of you who are standing, would you just extend your hands out to the side and extend this rope, this testimony to those around us, and everyone else? Would you just stand up? Would you stand up now with us? And if you feel comfortable, would you hold on to a hand so that we can be the red rope for each other? Because I am telling you that there are some people in this room who don't feel like they can hold on this morning. Let us hold on to you. Let us hold on to that hope that feels so hard to hold on to right now. You know, David wrote a number of songs when he was in the cave. In Psalm 57, he declares the victory of God over the darkness that he is in. But we're going to read through Psalm 142. Psalm 142, same David, same cave. Some of the same lyrics, but you can tell in the tone of the psalm that David's just gotten a little tired. He's gotten a little tired of declaring the victory without seeing the victory. I know some of us are feeling a little tired right now. And this is the rope he left for us. I am going to read the psalm over you, and if you would just respond with the sections that are for you. We're not just going to read these words together, we are going to pray them together and allow David to lead us. Psalm 142. I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out before him my complaint. Before him, I tell my trouble. When my spirit grows faint within me, it is you who watch over my way. In the path where I walk, people have hidden a snare for me. Look and see, there is no one at my right hand. No one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. I cry to you, Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Listen to my cry, for I am in desperate need. Rescue me from those who pursue me, for they are too strong for me. Set me free from my prison, that I may praise your name. Then the righteous will gather about me because of your goodness to me. God, you are good to me. Amen.